Hello. This is Mr. Math, your chess instructor. In this video, we'll be reviewing and analyzing another famous game, Steinitz versus von Bardeleben. For some background information, this was a tournament game played in Hastings in 1895. Wilhelm Steinitz is perhaps well known for being the first world champion, having been crowned earlier in 1886. He's often credited with being the pioneer of focusing on positional rather than tactical play, a sentiment that is, of course, shared on this channel. He also is quoted as saying that the king is the most powerful piece in chess, and while this is certainly true in the endgame, we'll see in this game how opening principles may often dictate otherwise. Kurt von Bardeleben was a master of the game in his own right, and while he was relatively young compared to Steinitz, his chess career would see him play and meet other world champions as well as him throughout his life. Following game was played in the 10th round of the 1895 Hastings tournament, about halfway through. However, it would end up being the most famous game ever played by both players involved. Once again, let's quickly review the things that one should and shouldn't do in the opening. The three goals we've discussed in previous videos are controlling the center, developing pieces, and getting the king to safety. Two of the things we've talked about avoiding are moving the same piece twice, as well as bringing out the queen too early. Similar to last video, try to keep those concepts in your mind as we go through this game. Steinitz played white, and Bardeleben played black. We had e5, knight f3, knight c6, and both players are following opening principles by developing pieces and controlling the center. And now bishop c4. Steinitz opted into the Italian here. Bishop c5, c3, and this is called the gioco piano. The idea of this move is that while it doesn't assist with development much, in fact c3 actively blocks white's knight, it prepares white to fully take the center with d4. Von Bardeleben, however, correctly understood that since white's knight could no longer go c3 or d2 to defend e4, that he should challenge the center himself with knight f6. Steinitz, however, went ahead anyway. d4, he captures d4, c captures d4, and now bishop b4 check since the bishop was attacked. Now what? Both white's king and pawn are attacked. Steinitz played knight c3, which looks like it defends the pawn and stops the king from being attacked, but it doesn't actually defend the pawn since the knight is actually pinned. However, the idea of knight c3 isn't actually to defend the pawn. It's to bait black to violate opening principles and move the knight twice in a row. If von Bardeleben had played knight takes e4 here, Steinitz would have responded by castling, after which black would have to handle threats to his hanging knight, as well as grapple with a potential pin on the e-file, a sacrifice on f7, or a pawn push on d5. So instead of all this, von Bardeleben decided to play pawn to d5. But this is a small mistake anyways, because after e takes d5, black is forced to move the same piece twice anyhow, knight takes d5, castle kingside. And now black faces much of the same problems. His king is still exposed, the knight is still attacked more times than it is defended. But in this scenario, black is not up a pawn like he would have been previously. Bishop e6, bishop g5, and now black makes another error, moves the same piece twice once again. Queen d7 was correct, but von Bardeleben plays bishop back to e7. If we pause right here, we can see that both sides have developed all of their minor pieces, and both sides have fought for control over the center. However, there's still one key difference, and that is that Steinitz has wasted no time whatsoever, and has therefore been able to castle his king, while von Bardeleben has spent time moving the same pieces multiple times, and therefore hasn't yet gotten the time to castle. However, if Steinitz were to do nothing, von Bardeleben could simply castle next turn. So instead, Steinitz begins to blow up the center. d5. Now, black's most obvious reply would be bishop captures d5 right back. But what about the bishop on g5? It's defended once and attacked twice because of black's battery. So, why could black not just play bishop takes g5 here? Take your time. There are multiple correct move sequences here, but all of them involve taking advantage of hanging pawns. So look carefully for those. Pause the video, and unpause when you found one of those sequences. Alright, had von Bardeleben played bishop captures g5, Steinitz would have likely responded bishop captures e6, forcing f takes e6, and now there are two hanging pawns on e6 and on b7. The simplest way to take advantage of this would be queen b3, oops, not d5, queen b3, forking the two, and simply winning a pawn. Notably, if black tried knight captures d4 to get a pawn back, knight captures d4, captures d4, queen b5 check would have forked the king and the bishop, and white would come ahead by a minor piece. So that was the simplest line. That's the one you probably most likely found, but there are also some other good moves here. Queen e2, for example, would also work. Again, take advantage of the hanging e6 pawn. In this case, instead of attacking the b7 pawn to force black's hand, queen e2 notices that black actually can't defend the e6 pawn with the queen. For example, if queen e7, knight captures g5, queen captures g5, and the pawn falls anyway. And again, this also eyes b5, allowing for the same trick that we mentioned earlier. Finally, the strongest move in the position would be d5. E captures d5, knight captures d5, as this would actually prevent black from the castling entirely. Why? Well, after castle kingside, knight takes g5, queen takes g5, the c7 pawn now is the one that hangs, knight captures c7. And this would both attack the AA rook and also attack the e6 square and therefore threaten to fork a second time from black's queen and rook. If you manage to see all of that, extremely well done. But of course, queen b3 was simply the easiest way to win material. So going back, instead of bishop captures g5, we had bishop captures d5. And now after knight takes d5, forcing the queen out, queen takes d5, bishop takes e7, knight takes e7. We can now more easily see just how important it is that black's king is stuck in the center. With most of black's defending pieces gone and the queen dragged out, Steinitz seizes the opportunity to begin an attack by stopping black from castling. Rook e1. Of course, if black tried to castle now, he would hang the e7 knight. But the king must be brought to safety. That's one of the three goals of the opening. So von Bardeleben tried pawn to f6. The idea behind this move is to try and castle by hand, with a series of moves king f7, rook e8, defending the knight with the rook, and then king g8. Of course, however, Steinitz would simply not allow such a slow maneuver. Queen e2, adding additional attack to the knight and threatening checkmate. So von Bardeleben is again forced to move the same piece twice. The only move that can defend the knight is the queen d7. And now, Steinitz plays rook c1, developing white's final piece. We can again see visually just how much of an advantage Steinitz had gained simply by following principles, while his opponent has made slight errors, wasting time. Von Bardeleben now made a slight error again, pawn to c6. While Steinitz had only made relatively simple moves up until this point, it was now that he demonstrated the skill that made him world champion. d5. A shocking looking move, the pawn is attacked thrice. And this was the idea behind von Bardeleben's previous move of c6, to stop white from playing d5. But neither the knight nor the queen can actually capture. The knight is pinned, and the queen is stuck defending the knight. So c captures d5. But what was Steinitz's follow-up to this move? Why sacrifice the pawn? Remember, Steinitz was a master of positioning and a pioneer of the positional style of play. Pause the video, take your time, and unpause when you're ready. Alright, let's focus on white's pieces. While they're all developed, they're not all contributing equally to the attack of black's king. White's queen and rook on the e-file are doing a good job of holding the king, but white's c1 rook and f3 knight aren't doing so much. And now you may realize the genius of d5. By sacrificing that pawn, both the scope of the rook and the knight are increased. However, the rook can't invade immediately since all of its invasion scores are covered, so the knight should be activated first, and that's precisely what Steinitz did, bringing his knight into the attack. From here on out, there are lots of tactics, so instead of having one puzzle, I'll let you know moments where an important tactic could be utilized. Here, Steinitz threatens knight f5, forking black's pieces. Remember that queen f5, of course, would lose checkmate on e7. So, von Bardeleben broke the pin with which was his plan, which stopped knight f5, but not knight e6, now threatening to invade with the rook. Von Bardeleben decided to defend with his rook, to which Steinitz threatened the other square the knight attacked, g7, with queen g4. Von Bardeleben played g6, avoiding mate, and now is our first critical moment. Everything's temporarily defended, but white must continue the attack somehow. Black's threatening otherwise to play rook takes c1, rook takes c1, queen takes e6, and trade pieces, all the while white's knight is pinned. Take a moment to think about how to continue. Alright. Steinitz, of course, didn't move his queen into a pin without a plan. He would rather prepared a discovered attack by check. And now, both black's king and queen are attacked. However, von Bardeleben had also prepared a response, king e8. This moved the king, while just barely getting there to defend the queen. But what to do now? Again, black's queen and knight are still attacked here. And, on top of that, he's also down a pawn. Take a moment to think. Alright. Steinitz could have played the simple, yet still beautiful, knight takes h7. Taking advantage of the fact that after queen takes g4, knight f6 check would fork the king and the queen, and now white would be the one up a pawn after taking 2 pawns on black's king side. However, just about nobody could have seen his next move. Not knight takes h7, winning a pawn, but rook captures e7. The rook, as it turns out, is invulnerable. The queen cannot take it because it's pinned to the rook on c8. If queen captures c7, rook captures c8, rook captures c8, queen captures c8, queen d8, takes, and knight f3. Steinitz would walk ahead a knight. The king also cannot take due to a variety of tactics that are related to mating threats on the king. So just for one example, king takes e7, rook e1 check, king d6, queen b4 check, king c6, rook c1, and that would be checkmate. So, has black lost? Take another second to think, this time from von Bardeleben's view. If you cannot take the rook, what are your options? Well, von Bardeleben certainly knew. King f8! With rook takes e7, white didn't solve any of his problems. In fact, he made them worse. Not only are white's queen and knight still hanging, but now both rooks are under attack as well. Steinitz cannot win the queen because he will get checkmated on the back rank. So again, what should Steinitz do? Take another moment to think. Well, side can capture anything safely. There's nothing stopping Steinitz from repeating. Check. Again, black cannot capture the rook. At this point, black's next move should be familiar. King g8, and so too should white's. Rook g7 check. The rook still cannot be captured. Now if king takes g7, queen takes d7 now works because it's check, and it also happens to fork the black rook on c8. But again, king h8, rook takes h7 check, and at this point, it is said that von Bardeleben got up from the board and simply left the game, leaving his clock to slowly tick down until he ran out of time. Spectators afterwards are said to have asked Steinitz why von Bardeleben left, to which he responded by showing a sequence of moves, where black would either lose his queen, or alternatively, be checkmated in 10 moves. If you want to try to find for yourself what will happen after king g8 versus, take a second, pause the video, and think about it. Alright, the sequence of moves that Steinitz had seen from the moment he played rook takes e7 check, and von Bardeleben had not seen up until the move he walked away from the board, was the following. Rook g7 check, king h8, Note that, of course, king f8 loses the queen, knight h7 check, king takes g7, queen d7 check, and as mentioned earlier, this is fine because it's check. So king h8 is forced, and now the mix-up, queen h4 check. Since the h file is now open, king takes g7, queen h7, king f8, queen h8. This is all forced. There are no other options. King e7, queen g7. Now, if king d6, then queen takes f6 will be mate because the king is blocked up by its own pieces as well as the rook on c1. So king e8, queen g8 check, king e7, queen f7 check, king d8, queen f8 check, and now the king can no longer run. Queen e8 blocking, knight f7 check, taking advantage of the pin, king d7, and finally queen d6 checkmate. So that was the game, Steinitz versus von Bardeleben. In summary, the result of this game was due to a small buildup of mistakes from von Bardeleben in the opening, which led to his king being stuck in the center. Steinitz was able to take advantage of that in that aspect alone by activating every single piece and keeping the opposing king from castling throughout the entire game, eventually leading to a large positional advantage that could be converted to tactics. Both of the previous historical games we went through had situations where the losing side was behind on more than one chess opening principle. But this game shows that being behind on even just a single one can mean a loss. Again, if you want to learn more about openings or tactics, I've got videos on this channel dedicated to both of those topics. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all next class.